Hey everybody, today I'm going to go over what is the anchored VWAP, how you can turn it on Optimus Flow, which is the platform for Optimus Futures, the broker, and really the right ways to use the anchored VWAP and some of the wrong ways to use the anchored VWAP. So the anchored VWAP is definitely not as popular as some of the other types of VWAP, which is generally just a continuous VWAP. So for example, most people are just using a VWAP such as the 14-day VWAP, which is essentially just a volume-weighted moving average. So the anchored VWAP actually is something where you're measuring the volume-weighted average price from a specific point in time, not necessarily just a continuous look back of 10 days or 20 days or whatever time period or time frame that you're using. So this is definitely something that is used by a ton of institutions, so it's extremely important because a lot of the time it does make the market, and it's not as popular through just the average retail user a lot of the time because some people have a hard time understanding what exactly it is. So first of all, if you want to turn on the anchored VWAP on Optimus Flow, just right click the chart, go to volume analysis, click show toolbar, and go to the custom VWAP. So if you click the custom VWAP, you'll see that you have two blue lines pop up, and that's essentially just showing you what is the date range that I want to anchor from. So the further I go back, you can see that this line goes back, and this is my anchor point. So if I want to anchor from this point here, December 28th of 2022, I just click, and you can see that this pops up. This yellow line as well as these blue dashed lines. Now these blue dashed lines are essentially just the standard deviation band. So I generally am not using the standard deviation band, so you can turn it off if you'd like, or you can keep it on. So it completely depends on what you'd like to do there. Some people find it useful. I find it a little noisy, but at the same time, you can see that price a lot of the time does respect this band pretty well. So you can see here at the top of this standard deviation band, price pretty much rode along it quite a bit as we reversed from that December low. So one thing that I'll mention here is the VWAP is essentially the volume weighted average price. Now the volume weighted average price from what point in time? From the anchored VWAP, the point in time is where did you anchor it from? So in this case, we anchored it from the December 28th, 2022 low here. And this is essentially just measuring what is the dollar cost average of every share that has been traded since this point. So you'll see here that a lot of the time when price mean reverts or pulls back, it's generally just pulling back to this volume weighted average price from the reversal, because you have to think a lot of the time if you have a big reversal, this is where sellers turn into buyers, or if you're at the top, this is where buyers turn into sellers. So this is essentially where the status quo changes. So one thing when you are using the VWAP is really knowing where to anchor the VWAP. So a lot of the time you want to find an important swing low. For example, here on MNQ, you can see here this is the December 28th low of 2022, and you can see here that we also had a lower low back in October. That was kind of your capitulation low. But notice here when I anchor a VWAP from this point, you don't have, and I'll delete this particular one here, you'll notice that the anchored VWAP from this October low did not really respect a lot of these points at which price pulled back. You can see if I highlight this, there's a lot of times where you had price just pretty much go through it and completely invalidate it, which to me tells me it's not that important of a VWAP. Now you can see here when we pulled back in March, we did bounce right above it. But for me, I really like to use VWAPs that essentially are really respecting price action a lot better. So what I'll do is I'll pretty much go from the very bottom and I'll just go to different pivots. So for example, here we started at this October low. We could see that that anchored VWAP wasn't that relevant. So then if you want to go to this next pivot, you can see here, same thing. Price really didn't do too much here. You had a big invalidation where price really didn't respect this at all. You can see that price did respect the bottom of the standard deviation band, but not necessarily the VWAP itself. So then we delete this and we go on to the next one. Here's your next pivot here. This is from essentially the 5th of January of 2023. And you can see this is definitely acting a little more relevant, right? So you can see 1, we respected it here. 2, we pretty much respected it here. 3, we had a little bit of an invalidation here. And then you can see from here on out, price hasn't really tested. So is it a relevant VWAP? Yes. Is it the most relevant VWAP for current price action way up here where we are now? Probably not. There's probably more VWAPs that are more relevant in our analysis that we can do. So what do? We move on to the next pivot. Well, your next pivot here is this point here from the 3rd of March. And you'll see here, this VWAP really respects price pretty well. And you can see 1, price bounced off it almost perfectly. 2, price did invalidate one day, but you can see it held and bounced after that. And then you can see 3, we're getting pretty close to this VWAP now. So this would definitely be a VWAP that I would probably keep up. Now, one thing that you can do is you can anchor another VWAP from, let's say, the swing high. So in this case, go to custom VWAP, click the swing high here, essentially this July 18th high. And you'll see here that, it wasn't a perfect VWAP. You can see that price kind of invalidated this point here. But you can see over the last couple days, this VWAP has been extremely important, where price rejected at this VWAP twice. So what you have now is you essentially have what Brian Shannon, who is essentially the godfather of the anchored VWAP, what you have is a potential pinch. A pinch is when price starts trading between a swing low and a swing high VWAP, and you can kind of get some price action that goes a little bit like this, kind of bounces in and out of or in between the swing high and the swing low VWAP. So the VWAP pinch is something that a lot of people may not know about. It's really just anchoring the VWAP from the swing high and the swing low, and then seeing which way price goes. So waiting for price to either break above and close above the top of the pinch or below the bottom of the pinch, which in this case is your March 12th swing low VWAP, you almost can use it like Bollinger Bands. So as the pinch gets tighter and tighter, you can see that price action is consolidating more and more. So if price continues to trade in a very small range, let's say, in the next few weeks within this range, these VWAPs will continue to get closer and closer, and you'll definitely be more likely to get a big move either to the upside or the downside. Now, the good way to use the VWAP is really waiting for either a day or 2 days to close above or below the VWAP for a better confirmation of a breakout or a breakdown. So that's really based on your style. Some people want to just see one close above a VWAP or a horizontal level or a moving average. Some people want to see maybe a longer term close. Maybe you're on the daily chart, but you want to see a weekly candle close above that VWAP. That's where things get a little more specific to your style, your risk tolerance, and all of that. So really, the VWAP is something that allows you to essentially see the dollar cost average of price from a specific point. And the reason why sometimes you get bounces off these points is because you're back to the dollar cost average. The average person from this March 12th VWAP is still up, right? So you can see here if we use the arrow, the average person, this is the average price for every share that's been traded, and we're trading up here. So we know the average share is currently in, or average contract in this case, since we're on futures, the average contract is still in profit. Once we get back down here, we know that the average participant is back to break even. So this is why you can have bounces at these VWAPs, because once everybody or the average participants back to break even, they're likely not going to sell because they're back to essentially their dollar cost average. So that's why you can have bounces here, not necessarily because buyers step in, but because supply dries up, and then you may get some short sell covering, and then that creates essentially a self-fulfilling prophecy for a reversal at these important levels. So institutions are big users of the anchored VWAP. They use it to gauge, did I exit good today, i.e. the anchored VWAP from the open is 100. I was able to get out of all my shares at 100 or my contracts or shares, it depends on what market you're trading. I was able to get out of all my shares at 102. So you essentially beat the VWAP. So that's how these institutions really use the anchored VWAP, either on a daily time frame or a longer time frame. It really just depends on what time frame they're looking at. So this is really how you can use the VWAP to gauge, are participants from X amount of time, do they have profit? Do they not have profit? And then you can see that the VWAP really does act as important levels of support and resistance depending on which. So if you wanted to use the swing high VWAP in the same way that we just discussed, you could see that from the high on July 18th, people were in a drawdown. The average participant was essentially in the red. So once they got back to break even, the average participant, the average contract got back to break even, people take some off the table because they're back to break even and they want to get out. So that's how these swing high VWAPs to the upside can act as resistance, and how the swing low VWAPs can act as support. So pretty much the opposite of each other when looking at resistance and support. So, these are the main ways to use it. One of the main errors that people do have, not only with the VWAP, anchored VWAP, any type of upper indicator is simply just anything on the chart. One of the main errors is not waiting for a candle close above or below. Getting too excited, looking at intraday price action and saying, oh, I'm going to get in or I'm going to get out before you actually have a close. And so a lot of the time, waiting for the candle to actually close to confirm a breakout or a breakdown is definitely the best way to utilize not only the anchored VWAP, but also other things on the chart, horizontal levels, moving averages, anything that you're looking for a confirmation of a breakout or a breakdown. It's always best to wait for that candle to actually close, whether you're on the daily candle, 5-minute candle, whatever the case may be. So hopefully this video is helpful in understanding what the anchored VWAP is, how you can add it on your Optimus flow chart, as well as some of the pros and cons of using the VWAP and the right ways to use the anchored VWAP. Last thing that I'll mention is we really went over swing lows and swing highs because we're on a futures chart, but a lot of the time you can use pretty much any status quo changing event to anchor a VWAP from. Year to date, month to date, a gap up, earnings, anything that really changes the status quo of the market, you can anchor a VWAP from there, because this is where essentially the market reset and you want to know what is the volume weighted average price from this particular event. So if you are using this on stocks, you can use it for earnings, gap ups, gap downs, general year to date beginnings, month to date, those types of things you can also use the anchored VWAP with as well. But there are a lot of different ways to use it. Using it on the swing high and the swing low side of things, or pivot points, is definitely the most popular way to use it, and the way that Brian Shannon, really the godfather of the anchored VWAP, does use this indicator. Hopefully this video was helpful, and everybody have a great one.